Before I start some introductions, can I just let you know that we do have simultaneous translation if you were to need it, and the channels, I think similar to when we were in the main room earlier, 1 for French, 2 for English, and 3 for Spanish. So please do take advantage of the translation as and when you need it. So we are actually live online as well. So hopefully we'll keep to time, and those who are watching online will be able to hear everything we say. We also have one of our panel members who is virtual today. And so we will be interacting back and forth with him on the screen. So this session this afternoon takes place in the stream entitled Evaluating in the Midst of Global Challenges, Fragility, Inequalities and Environment. And of course, we heard a lot this morning about the very particular challenges that we're all living through at the moment, whether as development professionals, as evaluation professionals, policymakers, decision makers. This is undoubtedly an incredibly challenging time. And we're not only focused on forward progress, but possibly preventing some really stunningly difficult reversals in progress that has been made over the last number of decades. The particular title for this session is The Need for Evaluation in an Unstable World. How are evaluations, responding to these big challenges? In what ways can we shape our evaluation practice to tackle these really significant and persistent challenges? Are there ways we can innovate as an evaluation community to be more relevant and agile and timely in the work we do in this kind of context? But also, how do we, from our professional standpoint, view these challenges, understand them, the impact that they have on our everyday work? So I'm delighted to have with me a panel. Let me quickly introduce everyone, and then we'll get into a first round of questions that I have before giving the panelists a chance to expand a little bit on their thoughts about the topic today. So on my immediate right is Kevin Watkins, an old friend. Kevin and I have been rubbing alongside in this business for a long time. Following each other's footsteps a bit. He's currently visiting professor at practice at the London School of Economics in the UK, and many other things, I should say, too many to list, but he's former CEO of Save the Children UK and formerly director of the Overseas Development Institute, where Kevin followed my time at ODI. Kevin also was director of the Human Development Report a number of years ago, and has had a really stellar career, and is a really interesting thinker on many of the issues that I think are really framing our conference this week. So I'll bring you in a moment, Kevin. Let me then go to George Gray-Molina, who is online. Welcome, George. Lovely to see you. He is head of strategic engagement and chief economist at UNDP. We're delighted you could join us, George, and I'll be coming back to you with an opening question in just a moment. Then we have Isabella Kiplagat, who's an economist with the National Treasury and Planning in Kenya. Isabel, welcome. It's great to have you here. And as I say, I'll be coming back to you in a moment. And then last but not least, we have El Hassam El Mansouri, who is General Secretary of the National Observatory of Human Development in Morocco. You're very welcome and very nice to see you. So I've asked the panelists at the outset to give us their kind of very, very short thoughts on what they see to be the vital contribution that evaluation can make, given the scale of global challenges facing us. And this is really to offer a kind of proposition, if you like, something that maybe can frame our conversation as we go along, which is, what do you consider to be a vital contribution? There are potentially many that evaluation can make, given the scale of the global challenges now facing us. So we'll start off with a quick answer from each of our panelists, and then I'm going to go into a further round of questions, and then we'll iterate back and forth, and I will also bring in you as an audience. We've got about an hour and a quarter, I think, and I think we've got lots of time to get into the meat of this. So let me start off. Kevin, you're a big picture guy, I think, and you see this, I think, from a very interesting perspective. And I know you're not first and foremost an evaluation professional, but if you were to think about this question, what do you consider to be a key contribution of evaluation in these times? You've heard some interesting things this morning too. What would you say it is?
I've been reflecting on this since listening to the conversations this morning, and I think the starting point for all of the keynote speakers, and actually in your introductory remarks as well, was that we're not living in normal times. And the scale of the reverses that we're seeing now, the extent of the challenge on climate change and the well-being of future generations are really systemic in nature. And I think for the evaluation community, the question that raises is sort of the obvious one, that, you know, a lot of evaluation activity is directed at, you know, what I would describe as marginal, important but marginal stuff. You know, how do you squeeze more out of the marginal dollar? You know, how do you reach more people at lower cost, that sort of thing. But I think at a time like this, the emphasis has to shift from, you know, to misuse the analogy, to shift from nudge to systemic. And in that shift, I think we just have to be honest about what the implications are for the evaluation community. You know, if you join the evaluation community because you want to be popular at a time like this, I would say forget it. Because what you're up against is governments who are failing to respond to the challenges that are emerging, and who need to be held to account, who are in positions of power, and evaluators need to speak truth to power. So that's the first thing. You're dealing with institutions. And by the way, in this, and I'm just going to be honest about this, you know, the major institutions, it's one thing to sign on to the SDGs. You know, everybody has signed on to the SDGs. I would say there has been a systemic failure in the UN system, in the Bretton Woods agencies, and in international NGOs to respond to the scale of this challenge. And so I think the issues for the evaluation community that come out of all of this, I think, you know, is first of all to ask the really tough questions. And this comes down to the independence of the institution. That, you know, like I know in the UK at the moment, there's an evaluation group in the FCDO, which sits around the cabinet table, but is frankly asking all the wrong questions. You know, they're asking, how do you improve efficiency of a system that is fundamentally failing the poor? And I think the role of independent evaluation is to highlight you know, what is failing the poor. I'd say one super quick point to end on. And I think in making that shift, it's so critical that, you know, a lot of the evaluations that I read are sort of technical exercises, you know, cost benefit studies, randomized control trials, all of which are important, but they just circumvent the politics. You know, I mean, if you're talking about an issue of how do you shift subsidies from things that do harm, you know, general energy subsidies, general food subsidies, to things that do good, that is a political process. It's not a sort of technical exercise. So I would like to see the evaluation community engaging much more with the political economy of change.
Fantastic. Well, that set the tone. Right. On that basis, George, can I bring you in? I'm coming back to you afterwards, Kevin, to get you to expand on a few things. George, are you with us online? You are. There you are. Can I ask, you know, that kind of just opening pitch, you know, to maybe build on some of the things that Kevin has said in terms of what is the vital contribution? I mean, Kevin made a pitch there about moving from focus on maybe marginal incremental performance change to the systemic. What is your view in this context of global challenge, the vital role that evaluation can play.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alison. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Delighted to be here. I think the vital role in building on Kevin's comments is holding up a mirror to decision makers and those of us on the development agency side, people who are engaging in this whole process. I think most of us hold multiple layers of how the world works in our mind and how development happens. And these layers are superimposed upon each other. So we have different ways of looking at income and consumption smoothing, or asset accumulation, or changes in institution and political stability. But we also hold beliefs about how development agencies act upon these processes. And I think it's hard to hold these two sets of layers together. And I think the evaluation community does that. I think it's a mirror that lets us know and makes us make explicit how we think about our theory of change or our theory of the future, because sometimes we're not actually analyzing data sets in the past, but thinking about projections, scenarios, and so on. So in a moment like this, in which these are not normal times, in which we're not looking at deltas of progress, but thinking about mitigating, doing no harm, not falling down as quickly as we hope, I think that's the primary vital function that evaluation does right now.
Fantastic, thank you. And building on those two contributions, Isabella, what do you feel from your standpoint is in this moment, given the unprecedented nature of the crises we're facing, a vital role for evaluation?
Thank you, Alison. Yes, building on what has been said, I come from a country that is actually experiencing what the rest of the economies are experiencing. Okay, I come from this country where we are experiencing the challenges, or the global challenges that all the rest are experiencing, beginning from the COVID-19 pandemic. Currently, we are having a tough situation where people are really experiencing a lot of droughts. The worst drought actually in the country since 1981. We've had our own share of locusts and all those things. And the question I ask myself, and I think what is being put across here, is whether evaluations is really key in terms of solving the issues that we are going through. And to that, and I think from the discussions that we've had yesterday and today morning, is that evaluations is really key, as these evaluations get to give us the how, the why, and how we get to approach these challenges. And so to me, from there, the question is, are the evaluations that we are conducting really able to tackle the issues that we have at hand? And so there's an answer that has been coming across the discussions also today, in terms of having a flexible and a more resilient evaluation system that should be able to tackle the issues that we are facing each and every day, and we are likely to face for the next couple of years. Thank you so much.
Perfect, thank you. A little bit of a theme emerging about whether we're asking the right questions at the right level. In order to perform that function, I think that George mentioned about holding up the mirror. You know, that only works when we're actually using evaluation to address some of the key questions. So let me now bring in Mr. Mansouri and ask you again. The short question at this point is, what is the vital role that evaluation can play given this context of significant global challenges? And then I'll come back to you for some further thoughts on other issues in a moment. So anything to add over what you've already heard? Thank you.
Merci, madame. C'est toujours très difficile d'être le dernier qui prend la parole. Surtout pour une question épineuse sur la contribution vitale dans un contexte et des défis multidimensionnels qu'on n'a jamais vécu. Je viens comme ma collègue.
Could you put your microphone on? That's it.
Je viens d'un pays comme ma collègue du Kenya, qui se situe sur le plan géographique au sud de la Méditerranée, où le changement climatique a des répercussions très rapides. J'ai dit même que le changement il est brutal. Je donne uniquement l'exemple de cette année. La sécheresse du Maroc, au Maroc, il a ravagé pratiquement toutes les strates territoriaux. Et j'ai dit même qu'on a enregistré un déficit de 2/3 cette année et que les barrages, aujourd'hui, ne captent que 25% au lieu de 50% par rapport à la situation d'aujourd'hui l'année dernière. La comparaison avec l'année dernière. Maintenant, comment notre contribution peut être vitale? Je crois que, comme ça a été dit par mes collègues, l'évaluation, ça permet de donner une situation à un moment donné, la réalité d'un moment donné. Mais si on s'inscrit dans une démarche prospective, il peut nous renseigner aussi, anticiper sur le futur. Et c'est là où ça va aider les décideurs de prendre des décisions et les bousculer, parce que le temps, on a parlé ce matin du temps, le temps des décideurs, le temps de politique, ce n'est pas le temps des évaluateurs. L'évaluateur, il peut prendre du temps. Il peut, avec ces données qui cumulent, analyser le passé, le futur, le présent et se projeter sur le futur. Et là, il peut donner un certain nombre de pistes de changement qui doivent s'opérer sur le plan politique et pousser à des décisions qui ne sont pas toujours populaires.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I think we have, as a kind of opening set of contributions there, some useful points to be picking up later in the discussion. And I really want you to hold on to some of those contributions and we'll come back to them in the discussion. But I want to start by going back to you, Kevin, and just maybe asking you to expand a little bit more on your opening thesis, if you like, which is this need to sort of move the, you know, the focus of evaluation away from, or in addition to, maybe a focus on, you know, what change at the margin, or what incremental changes can we make, you know, in the policy sphere, in the programming sphere, to something that addresses much more these systemic questions. And from your point of view, you're not an evaluator first and foremost. How do these systemic issues now demonstrate themselves, show themselves, and why should we all be sort of really concerned about them right now?
Well, sorry. So first of all, everybody in this room, I suspect, is working for an organization that has endorsed the Sustainable Development Goals. And that's at the heart of the evaluation mission. Now, you know, when you listen to the narratives on the Sustainable Development Goals this morning, including in the keynote addresses this morning, you sort of have the impression that you know, everybody is so committed to these targets, to the eradication of poverty, to getting every child in school and learning, to gender equity, and extraordinarily and surprisingly, none of it's happening. And not only is none of it happening, it's all going backwards. And nobody is responsible for this. I didn't hear a single keynote speaker this morning talk about the agents in government and in international institutions who are responsible. You know, we use this narrative, nobody left behind. There are policies that are systematically pushing people behind, and they're policies that are rooted in power relationships and in the political economy of change. Now, these are things I've read a lot of, I'm not an evaluator, but I've read a lot of evaluations. I very, very, very seldom read an evaluation that specifies, you know, this government is not adopting what appear on paper to be sensible pro-poor policies. Who's benefiting from the policies that are being put in place? Who's capturing the subsidies? Where is the public spending going? You know, who is responsible for leaving people behind? You know, I've just read a whole World Bank report on, you know, what's happening in trends in poverty. You know, the report saying this is the worst setback in poverty since the Second World War. You know, very good analytics. It's very silent, actually, on, you know, what are the interventions, you know, what is the business model in the World Bank that needs to change to address that? Now, I know, you know, this is much more your territory than mine, but I do think this comes down to, you know, alongside the important emphasis on the standard toolkit, you know, the cost benefit stuff, the randomized control stuff, the before and after stuff, of having some really credible political economy and power analytics that explain why the world looks like it does. And this does come back to my first point, which is the importance of courting unpopularity on the part of the evaluation community. You know, there are many things that good evaluation does. You know, it provides information, that's critical. It supports accountability. But I also think for organizations that are signed up to the SDGs, evaluators have to take a stand on the side of the poor. And this is not politically neutral. And I think just being explicit and overt about, you know, there's a responsibility to take sides on this, you know, and you know, not to treat this as though this is some sort of objective scientific exercise that, you know, we're all standing back, you know. So I think really engaging much more with the politics of the drivers that are pushing people behind.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. Interesting reflections there. And I think it raises all kinds of questions for those of us who work in highly institutionalized evaluation functions as how we navigate those really challenging sort of political waters, if you like. And I would be great if we could come back to some of that. And I'd love to hear from your experiences. But before we do that, George, can I bring you back in now? And in advance of this, I sort of pitched a question to you about drawing specifically from your experience in UNDP. You talked about holding up the mirror and the importance of evaluation in that respect. But can you just talk us through a little bit, practically speaking, how evaluative evidence really gets drawn upon in an organization like UNDP to feed into thinking process, reflections, decision-making, and where do you see it needing to step up, given the kind of context that we're in today?
Thank you so much, Alison. I think we've evolved and we're learning a lot over the past few years, particularly since the COVID response, on how to think about evaluation and how we think about that function of holding up the mirror. I would say two things that are specific that I think we're learning at UNDP through evaluation. One is getting into that black box of process that in moments of disruption. So we know that our temptation is to look at the before and after scenario and sort of grasp at inference at what changed. But just, I think Kevin put his finger on an issue, which is the process, the politics, the institutional change that happens during those moments of change. And I think UNDP has started to engage, at least the evaluation committee has started to engage in that process. And I just give you one example that comes out of the work from Fragile Contexts. I think 300 of our staff moved from Kyiv to Eastern Ukraine earlier this year. And nothing our staff did may have moved the needle on conventional metrics. But I think what we're seeing is that this staying to deliver function is perhaps the most relevant issue. The value is immense. And I think this value is actually being captured by many of our colleagues who are doing evaluation on the ground, just looking at what that signifies politically and also institutionally to help uphold services on the ground, gather data, project population movements, and so on. This is quick and dirty, but it helps us hold the mirror on what is valuable at this moment. A second thing that I think we've learned also is using different types of data. And we used to, in normal times, we of course look at comparable data, standardized data that has 2-year lags and so on. But during response times, I think we expand that. And just thinking about how we tell the story of the Nike swish in each country, we use idiosyncratic policy narratives. We tell stories of lockdowns or of interventions of cash transfers or assistance to small and medium businesses or about vaccine rollout and so on. Each country has a distinct narrative about how they succeeded or failed because we're into the 4th or 5th wave right now. So I think we're learning about how to tell stories about change that are disruptive, where things change from period 1 to period 2 to period 3. And we're holding back from the temptation of just focusing on the before and after. So I think we're engaging in the black box, if you will, of data and of thinking through what is moving, what is shifting.
Thank you very much indeed. And that's a really interesting perspective that in a way what I'm not sure it's only the pandemic, but in your reference, you referred there to COVID-19 has sort of changed the way we need to think about change processes themselves, and how we also then use evaluation over time to build up and shore up some of the action that needs to take place and shift in different phases of something like a rollout of a pandemic, which is very interesting. And the idea that you simply have a before and an after, maybe that's being disrupted now by the kind of world that we are in. Isabella, you sit inside a National Treasury and Planning Ministry. You're presumably very aware of some of the challenges that decision makers are facing in this kind of period of unprecedented crisis. Do you have a sense of, do you have ideas about, the way in which evaluation can be best embedded within an institutional setting or to inform decision making, particularly given, the scale and pace of change that we're experiencing at the moment? So any thoughts from you on that?
Yes, so thank you for bringing up the idea of embedding evaluations in our institutions. And basically, I work for the public sector, and it's a sector that for quite a long time has lagged behind in terms of monitoring and evaluation. But we are trying to keep up the pace. For a long time, the idea of monitoring and evaluation has been with our development partners and not the public sector per se. But I must say that we are trying to keep up the pace, and basically we are borrowing from the good practices that we've had around. And some of these good practices have been alluded to, especially this morning during the various remarks and addresses. And I picked out two things. And one key thing is the issue of building the capacities, a strong monitoring and evaluation system, that is, and then a flexible one for that matter. And when you talk about the strong monitoring and evaluation capacities, we have concentrated so much on the monitoring and left behind the E for some time. But I think the discussions going forward are, we try to look more into E, because it actually kind of gives us a deeper understanding of what is going on. So some of the elements that we could look for in strengthening the evaluations, as was said today, is things to do with the capacity, actually the competency to undertake evaluations, commission evaluations, and even to use evaluations, because both sides of the divide, both the demand side and the supply side are equally important in terms of taking this initiative forward. Then, of course, we look at sound policy and legal framework, which was also alluded to this morning, quite important in terms of institutionalizing evaluations in our various countries and institutions. And of course, we want to look at the strong evaluative culture. I mean, do our systems or do our institutions ask for evaluations? Do they use them in the first place? Because we might produce on the supply side, we may have very good reports. But again, it depends. Are they being used? Do they even do our legislative side of the government ask for these reports that we produce? So it's a win-win situation for both sides, the demand side and the supply side. And of course, the other thing that needs to come out very clearly is flexibility, and that's something that has been talked about since morning. We need to be flexible in terms of our evaluation systems. This is in terms of either data collection, the approaches that we employ. These are situations that might require us to produce evidence much faster than we normally do. So are our systems able to actually respond to that in a timely manner? So quite a number of issues that are going on there. So basically, strong evaluation systems and flexible, resilient evaluation systems is the way to go to institutionalize evaluations in the countries and institutions. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Isabella. All super points, and we might come back and talk a little bit about this point you raised around pace. You know, the demands on evaluation are undoubtedly growing, but there's also an expectation, I think, of flexibility and pace, which is something that I'd really like to hear from others about how we're stepping up in that regard. But let me just invite Al-Hassan now to maybe reflect on something which is, I think, also a really important and potential concern, I think, for the evaluation community, that in this time of significant challenge, which is the danger that evaluation can actually replicate some of the very difficult social dynamics we've seen around ourselves at the moment, that it becomes not in Kevin's sense, you know, it doesn't tackle the politics head on, it becomes almost embedded and part of the problem because it's just replicating the issues and dynamics we've seen around them. How do we, as evaluators or as evaluation entities, work against that? Have you got experiences of how to use evaluation to overcome some of these challenges of, you know, social inequality and so on?
Merci pour cette question précise. D'abord, je dois préciser que l'ONDH, c'est une structure à caractère consultatif. On n'impose pas les recommandations ni les résultats. C'est aux acteurs de choisir ce qu'ils veulent adopter ou ce qu'ils ne veulent pas adopter. Mais parmi les ingrédients de réussite, de retombée de l'évaluation, ça a été dit tout à l'heure, en termes de processus, en termes de demande. Quand on a une saisine, quand on a une évaluation qui est désirée, qui est demandée, avec un portage institutionnel, mais aussi avec un leadership, on a l'essentiel des ingrédients pour avoir des retombées efficaces et immédiates de l'évaluation. Et je donne un exemple. On a des déperditions scolaires, on a généralisé l'enseignement primaire. Mais on a beaucoup de déperditions scolaires. On a aux alentours de 340 000 élèves qui quittent l'école entre le primaire et le lycée annuellement. Autrement dit, entre les inscriptions, nouvelles inscriptions et les décrochages, on fait un peu de surplace. Le solde est zéro, en quelque sorte. Et on cherchait pourquoi. Et surtout dans le milieu rural. Et on était interpellés pour aller voir avec nos données qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire. Et c'est là où il y avait toute une réflexion, parce qu'il faut repenser un peu nos outils dans un contexte de défi. Il y a Covid, c'était en 2020. Comment il faut mener les enquêtes sur le terrain et répondre à des requêtes dans un temps record. Le temps compte énormément. Le temps des décideurs, ce n'est pas le temps de l'académie, ni des évaluateurs. Et il y avait toute une mobilisation du ministère de l'Intérieur, ministère de l'Éducation, ministère du Développement social, pour accompagner les cadres de l'ONDH. Et au lieu de faire l'enquête 3 mois, on l'a fait 1 mois, tout en respectant tout ce qu'il faut sur le plan scientifique et technique. Et on a mobilisé tous les experts pour faire les analyses et sortir dans 2 mois. Et ça a été mobilisé de très hauts responsables ministres au niveau du Maroc pour écouter les résultats. Et là, il y a un point qui me semble très important. On peut être très pertinent en termes de résultats. On peut avoir les outils les plus perfectionnés. Il faut faire attention à la communication. Le mot est compté. Être évaluateur, il faut savoir aussi communiquer. Il faut avoir la pédagogie pour transmettre. Tout dire, mais sans faire du mal. Décrire la réalité. Et ne pas tomber dans plusieurs recommandations, aller à l'essentiel. Ce qui est possible à mobiliser les acteurs avec les moyens qu'ils ont pour changer les choses et créer des moments de rupture. Et c'est ça le plus important. Et ça a été tout de suite après une grande réunion et une petite commission pour la feuille de route. On a dégagé uniquement 5 recommandations, essentiellement pour les maisons des élèves et des étudiants en milieu rural, là où la déperdition scolaire est énorme. Et le portage était assuré parce qu'il y avait le ministère de l'Éducation. Et on a invité le ministère des Finances pour assurer le financement. Et tout ça pour dire que la demande compte. Quand il y a une saisine, il faut la saisir, mais il faut honorer le contrat dans les règles de l'art, sans oublier la communication. Merci.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So we've had, I think, a number of really interesting points made, and I'm just doing a quick tally here of some of the, I think, slight fault lines that it would be really useful for us to explore in discussion. And I think that would make it hopefully a slightly lively discussion. So what we've heard about is the importance of embedding evaluation close to, you know, the places where decisions get made, but really trying to build an evaluation culture within particularly public institutions, but not exclusively. But we've also heard about the need to ask the tough questions and the importance of asking the tough questions. How do we marry those two things? We've heard about the importance of being kind of user-focused and the importance of communications and how we communicate evaluation evidence. But we've also heard about the importance of accepting unpopularity as an evaluation community as we fulfill this function of speaking truth to power. We've heard about the need to deploy, you know, all the best methods, to be technically sound and rigorous, but to not lose sight of the big issues around us, not to be so focused on a narrow agenda where we as evaluators feel we kind of control all the pieces, where actually we need to shift our gaze to some of the bigger questions. And we've heard about don't dodge the difficult political questions. And we've heard an even stronger proposition from Kevin, which is take sides. Now that is, I would say, for the evaluation community, a very uncomfortable message. And I'd really like to hear from you all about what do you think about some of these things, these fault lines, in a sense, between the different positions. I think in the end, over a coffee, we'd all agree, but I do really want to get your opinions on some of these things. So can we open up the floor? I'll take a quick round of reflections, and I particularly want to hear from you where you feel you have some ideas about how we solve some of these differences, if you like, how we make sense of these fault lines, not just restating the problem. So the lady in the front here, please, and please just let us know who you are.
Hello, everybody. This is Shafiqa from UNDP Morocco. Thank you for all the panelists. And maybe I will have a tough recommendation or question, because yesterday, evaluation was important. Today is vital. The degree of its impact in our daily life as citizens, not as practitioner, is more important. And I'm wondering the fact that the important role of evaluation to anticipate and predict problems was seen since a long time. And I can remember I attended the first NEC, and I feel like we are saying the same things. Evaluation is a long journey. And maybe as community of practice, we should ask the question what we've missed during this journey. Because I can give example from the organization I'm coming from, UNDP. Only the Human Development Report, I can remember in 2005, we were talking about the issue of water. And no one take any actions on this regard. In Morocco, we are suffering from the question of water. 10 years ago, we were talking about migration. before we were talking about climate change, what we can do to make our recommendations or evaluation more attractive and more, I cannot find the word, plus autoritaire, pour qu'on puisse inciter ces décideurs à avoir des changements. Et comme a dit M. Mansouri, c'est que les évaluateurs ont le temps et on a tendance de travailler, en fait, de servir des décideurs politiques pour gérer le quotidien. Comment apprendre aux politiques de ne pas se concentrer sur le quotidien, mais en même temps anticiper les problématiques dans l'avenir. Et j'imagine qu'il y a énormément de rapports de la Banque mondiale, l'OCDE, qu'il faut prendre en considération. Merci.
Great, thank you. Let me bring a few more in and then we'll get some reflections from the panel. I know, yes, please.
Yeah,
thank you.
I came from NDP Yemen, where the situation is much more worse than ever. The challenges that the whole world faced, whether it's COVID-19 or other things, but we have also a civil war, and we have a fragmented government, 2 governments and 2 parliaments and 2 things that are happening. And as an office, we were supposed to develop our program, CPD, country program document, and we are supposed to assess it, and we are supposed to evaluate our projects from 2 different contexts. The only thing that we managed to do with flexibility is theory of change, adaptability, change management. This is the tools that helped us quite a lot to be much more flexible in absorbing what's going on. But the real challenge here that we faced in this fragmented world environment that we are in is getting the right information. The informants that we relied on at different, whether they are academicians or academians, or they are from the business community or the lords of war that we are supposed to encounter, whether we like it or not. But the real challenge we face is getting the right information. All these tools are very helpful, very flexible, but we fail to get the right information. Verification of that information we need, I think, at UNDP level, at the community of evaluation, is to develop it further to get get our marker and our focus in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I've got a gentleman here and then I'll go back to you, Ian. So the gentleman here.
Okay, my name is Jerry D. Zanga. I come from Liberia, Minister of Finance and Development Planning. I'm happy about hearing evaluation systems today. Something that was said here was about communicating the results of evaluation, makes evaluation more important. How do you feed back to the service users? Communicating the result. For example, in my country, there's a practice. We communicate the result using a friendly media. The radio station, the national radio station, is used to communicate the findings of the evaluation so that people who use that service, beneficiaries, can feed back to the evaluators. We are doing a performance evaluation of our development plan, which means we are taking inventory of all the results that we plan to deliver to the citizen. We are now evaluating year 5 of the development plan. The development plan is called Propo Agenda for Prosperity and Development. In that agenda, we made a lot of targets. We made a lot of promises. And we feel that we have delivered some of them and we have not delivered the rest of it. There are reasons. The COVID-19 has impact on our development plan. Those that we have delivered, we need to communicate to the public, to the villages, using the national radio system to deliver the feedback. But we also expect recommendations from the public, because we are in transition. We are moving to election next year in order to develop another a development plan that will take over from this, we need to get feedback from the citizens on what we promised first. So development evaluation is key in this regard. Thank you.
Fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. Really useful and such an important linkage to re-establish between, you know, evaluation of a development plan and actually those who are, as you say, the ultimate beneficiaries and users of that. Ian, over to you.
So, Ian Goldman from South Africa. So, I think, firstly, I think this is the coolest year we'll ever know in our lifetime, and this is the most stable year we'll ever know in our lifetime. So things just get worse from here. So we need different processes that will adapt to that situation. I thought Maria Espinosa's comment this morning about making decisions in times of, during a crisis is exactly where we're at. So we need, and Al Hassan talked about we need rapid methods, both for evaluation, rapid synthesis, etc. We've got to move to different models and away from our comfort zones of long evaluations taking 2 to 3 years. And we also must be looking, I think you mentioned the word embedded, we must be looking to process use, rapid feedback from evaluative processes into decision-making, which are not waiting for the report as well. And lastly, just in terms of Kevin's point about how do we make sure that we are addressing the critical issues. In South Africa, what we've done is we've added 2 criteria, one on climate and ecosystems health and one on transformative equity. And so all evaluations hopefully are going to be judged against those. So that's going to mean that every intervention is pushed as to whether it's dealing with a transformative equity and whether the consequences of transformative equity or climate breakdown, what it will mean for the intervention as well.
Great. Thank you very much. I want to bring, yes, the lady here, and then I'll bring in panelists to reflect a little bit on some of those points. Please go ahead.
Hello, I'm Ashikin from Malaysia. Okay, in my country, we are facing like unstable government. In 5 years, we have 3 prime ministers. We have a change of the government. After 60 years, the opposition take over the government. So how we as evaluator to have effective evaluation? Because when it comes new government after 60 years, the policy change. Like in the previous government, we introduced GST. But in honor their manifesto, the opposition, they remove the GST, so we didn't have enough income. And our country face like a severe fiscal position right now. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm from the UK and I'm from an unstable country. We've had 3 prime ministers in the last 3 months. So I share your pain. Let me come back a little bit to the panel just to sort of reflect a little bit on some of those points. And I also want to keep rolling with this notion that, you know, and I want you all to feel ever so slightly uncomfortable for a minute, just sort of challenge yourselves about saying, as part of this evaluation community, is the challenge that has been put on the table, particularly by Kevin, to say, where are we on the big issues? Are we taking the politics seriously? Are we clear about what our role is? Have a moment of self-reflection. Do you feel that in the work you're doing, in the context you're doing, you're able to translate that and think about what that means? Because I think our purpose being here these few days is not just to sit here and be comfortable, right? We need to challenge ourselves. So let me bring all of you back in, anything you've heard, but also if you want to expand on the points that you've made already. Kevin, over to you.
Well, look, there's some really great points that are being made. And I thought that, you know, the points from Liberia about remembering who we work for, actually, which is for ordinary citizens. I mean, that's who the SDGs are for. I'd make a couple of points. So look, I think there's a set of efficiency issues, if you like, and a set of equity issues. Now, in the efficiency box, I would put, I'm not talking about technical efficiency here, I'm talking about political efficiency. That, I mean, to give an anecdote, you know, I was once doing some work for a former prime minister who will remain nameless in this context. And, you know, he asked me to pull together the evidence because he was making a speech on education about making the case for investment in education. So I went round to some academic friends and said, look, you know, what's the best evidence you've got on education? And they gave me a bunch of rate of return stuff. So, you know, and it was something like, you know, every dollar you invest in education, you're going to get another $20 back. And then of course, the nutrition guys are saying every dollar you invest in nutrition, you're going to get $50 back. And then some. Anyway, the politician in question spontaneously combusted when I said, look, this is the evidence. And he made the point, look, you know, this is a rate of return over 40 years. This is meaningless politically. It's totally irrelevant. What I want to know, what are the budget implications and the public finance implications in this budget cycle? And I know, Isabella, you'll be way closer to this than I am, but you know, persuading political leaders of the case for doing something is not just a technical exercise. And you can't do it on the basis of numbers that are frankly meaningless and often speculative. So I think being smart and efficient in the way you present evidence, the language you use, you know, making the case that change is possible, you know, politically dangerous, but possible. You know, you tried to remove subsidies from energy to social safety nets in Indonesia, and the government successfully navigated it. You do it in France and you have street protests. Now, you know, there's a learning here, and we need to take that seriously. I guess where I would push back on some of the comments, there's a lot of, like, I'm an evidence geek, just to put this on the table, and I really care about information. But really, are you seriously saying that, you know, when you look at these big setbacks on the SDGs, in education, in poverty, in other areas, it's information? I mean, come on. You know, these guys know what, but I mean, the political leaders who are making these choices know the consequences of their actions. You know, the heads of agencies know the consequences of what they're doing. So I think, you know, let's not hide behind the argument that this is an information and evidence problem. It's a political problem and a political economy problem. And that's why I do come back to this point. You know, if you believe in the SDGs, you know, the famous preamble of the SDGs, everyone is going to progress, but the poor, those who are being left behind, will progress more than everybody else. You can translate that into public policy interventions. The South Africa point, I think, is a fantastic one, that, you know, the transformative equity approach, you know, this comes down to issues of public finance and other public policy interventions. Now, I would submit, if you don't take sides on this, you are taking sides. You know, you're taking the side of the people who are hiding behind evaluations to do the wrong thing. And if I had 30 seconds, actually, I'll give you a classic example of this. In the UK, in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, there is an evaluation team that actually sits at the cabinet table, by the way, and evaluates a really wide range of policies. Sorry, this is in the cabinet, not in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Now, they've recently done an evaluation of the welfare system in the UK. And it's on the use of digital technologies, about how you can make the welfare system more efficient through digital technologies. It's a great report. So you've got the evaluation team doing that. You've got the government systematically cutting welfare budgets in a way that will compound poverty. And then the same government holding up this report about how we're going to build a more efficient welfare system. These aren't information problems. These are political choices that governments are making. So I would say the evaluation community, if you're serious about the SDGs, if you're committed to the SDGs, take sides. And since Leonard Cohen was quoted this morning, I want to quote another philosopher, which is Bob Marley, which is get up, stand up for your rights, get up, stand up, get your evaluation systems right. Actually, the last one was me, not Bob Marley, but you take the point.
Nicely done, nicely done. So I want to bring George, where, you know, I think we've had some interesting contributions from those in the room here. I hope you've heard some of those. How important is it, you know, from your standpoint, that evaluation does take a stand on some of these big issues?
I think we moved a long way over the past few years. We used to think of the SDG agenda maybe a bit naively a few years ago as thinking about statistical gaps, and we would compare the gap on poverty to the gap on gender equality to the gap on electricity access. And now I think we have lost that that illusion of comparability. We know that behind each of these gaps is a political process, is institutional change, is fiscal resources and financial resources and so on. So the constraints, the politics, the institutions, the fiscal and financial side have become more prevalent in our discussion. And I think that's fantastic. That's where we have to start. Now, having said that, I do think that we also have to think through and then understand how change happens. Does it happen? Will we move the needle on the climate agenda just by visibilizing the climate agenda? No, we have to do more than that. So we have to start thinking about what are the political coalitions that need to change? What are the institutional constraints? What are the fiscal and financial flows and so on? And I think that conversation is happening. The question about the stand, I would say, is two-faced. There's one stand that's happening by development agencies themselves as we work on the ground. And there's a second stand by evaluators looking at what development agencies are doing. So I would argue both are important. You know, things that we've been trying to do since early 2020 is talk about the debt moratoria, debt restructuring, access to SDRs, access to concessional financing 6, 9, 12 months before mainstream decision makers were doing that. So that was outside of the box in early 2020, but it's not so now. It's inside the box in 2022 to talk about SDR allocation. So I think what we need to do is, yes, we need to be courageous on that position, but we also need to reflect what the conversation is in the real world. And that conversation is happening at a different speed. So just cognizant about that, the role of evaluator, it doesn't happen alone. I think it happens with respect to what is being evaluated, who the agents are, what they're doing or not doing. And I think, and I agree with Kevin, we can call out the agents that are not doing things, but I wouldn't put all of the weight of the world on the evaluator. I think that's what we have political processes for. That's what we have social mobilization for. That's what we have debt relief for. That's what we have massive processes for. So that's how I see this process. But I do think that we're moving along in the cognizance that this is not just about finding what the gap is and solving it by visibilizing it. We moved much beyond that in this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Really useful points. And I also like the fact that, in a way, just to take a part of your intervention there, we need to spend more time as evaluators, I think, focusing on the how of change, not only the what, which is, you know, we need to bring much more understanding to how things do change in a positive direction, not only answering these questions, what has changed, because it's those processes of change that are getting so complex now that we need to be focusing more of our attention on. Isabella, how do we avoid your point about embedding, which is super useful, but how do we avoid, by embedding, evaluation becoming the fig leaf for bad decisions by politicians? How do we avoid that? I'm sure you've got some ideas.
Thank you for that question. I'm not so sure whether I have the right answers to that. But basically, what is coming out from the floor is that we have cross-cutting issues, and they apply to basically almost each and every country here. And basically, I want to echo what Kevin is talking about, the political leadership. And yes, he rightfully said that it's not actually very easy to deal with this group. Yes, our evaluation policy has just been approved. And do you know how long it has taken to approve that policy? Ian, close to a decade. It's close to a decade, and basically because every time we are about to convince the political leadership that this is the thing, we change. And basically that's what has been happening. And we were praying that this time there is no change before the approval of the policy. And at the end of it all, some few months to elections, we had the policy approved. And that was a plus for us. Basically, now the next thing is, with the new political class, are we able to implement that policy again? So we start all over again. You remember what you what issue my colleague here was raising? Basically, where did we miss? I mean, we keep on going back and back again. And that is it for us. But we are happy that we are progressing, and two relevant issues are coming out here. The need for communication as a key to ensuring use of evaluations. And I think we borrow a lot from South Africa. They are doing well in terms of actually informing our policy. And the second thing that was coming out is what has been discussed here on the plans, the development plans as enablers for the evaluations, because without those plans, without very good plans, we cannot be able to evaluate. So basically, that's what is clearly coming out from the floor in terms of embedding these evaluations. And yes, a final comment is that we need to, for successful evaluations, we actually need a collaborative effort. We can't do it alone as a public sector. We need to bring in all the others, the evaluation practitioners, the voluntary evaluation practitioners, the CSOs, our development partners, and I want to appreciate them because they've really played a key role in terms of actually strengthening the M&E in the public sector. So we need each other. We need everyone on board so that we're able to move ahead. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, and all good wishes to you continuing to navigate that political context. Hassan, let me bring you back in and kind of ask the same question, but feel free to add your own responses to what you heard, which is, how do we avoid evaluation in a sense becoming the fig leaf or the way of covering up, in a sense, for bad decisions? Because you know, in my own experience, even sometimes one finds an evaluation that gets used in a way that was never intended. And that can be very tough to then navigate and follow up. And now, you know, we can say that we are entirely politically neutral, but our evidence is used, and sometimes not in ways that we would hope. So any thoughts on that and anything else you've heard?
Merci beaucoup. Je vais revenir à mes petites expériences au niveau d'évaluation au niveau du Maroc. Et je vais revenir à ce qui a été dit tout à l'heure. Nous, évaluateurs, on n'est pas aimés, on n'est pas populaires chez nous. On est même parfois détestés. Donc, il faut être armé, patience et persévérance. Et je donne un exemple. On était créé en 2006 après le lancement de l'initiative nationale pour le développement humain au Maroc, dont l'essentiel, c'est de faire le suivi et l'évaluation de cette initiative, qui est l'initiative du roi du Maroc. Et c'est essentiellement pour rattraper le retard du Maroc en matière de développement humain. Et on a fait la première évaluation où on a dégagé les ratages, ce qu'on a raté au niveau de cette évaluation et comment on est en train de dévier. Et la première chose, c'est qu'une rupture avec la structure qui conduit l'NDH, il nous a traités comme on n'a rien compris. On a fait une deuxième évaluation. On a montré, on l'a dit, que l'NDH, cette initiative, elle a fait tout sauf l'essentiel. Elle n'a pas touché l'éducation, elle n'a pas touché la santé, qui sont les piliers du développement humain. Deuxième crash, conflit entre nous et la structure. On n'a rien compris. Jusqu'à un moment où il y avait un grand débat au niveau du Maroc. On a lancé le débat, on a lancé l'India, ça fait 10 ans. On a un rapport de PNUD qui montre que le classement du Maroc en matière de développement humain n'a pas changé. C'est à ce moment-là qu'un certain nombre de responsables disent, écoutez, ça vaut le coup d'aller regarder les évaluations de l'ONDH. Et c'est à ce moment-là qu'on a utilisé nous-mêmes nos canaux. Ce n'est pas la masse média, c'est surtout les leaders d'opinion, c'est surtout les universitaires et c'est surtout les ONG pour relater ce qu'on a dit et le remettre sur la table. L'essentiel a été adopté, dans la douleur bien sûr. Ce n'était pas facile. Mais on a appris une chose, et je réponds à la question de la communication. Et après, avec les acteurs, ils nous ont dit, écoutez, vous faites l'évaluation, c'est bien, mais ce n'est pas la peine d'étaler tout ça sur la place publique. Vous êtes en train de nous noter devant tout le monde. Faites les choses entre nous. Et on a testé ça. Et souvent, ça marche. Quand on est uniquement entre les acteurs concernés, il y a un va-et-vient. Ils n'adoptent pas tout, mais ils n'ignorent pas tout non plus. Et dans le même sens, on a utilisé les espaces les plus neutres, les universités. Des manifestations, des rencontres, et on invite les élus comme animateurs, comme participants, n'importe comment, mais l'essentiel, c'est qu'ils soient avec nous, mais aussi avec les ONG, aussi avec les leaders d'opinion, et le message est mieux transmis par les autres circuits que par notre structure. L'essentiel, c'est atteindre l'objectif. Et je crois que c'est très important. Troisième point sur la question des recommandations, des évaluations et la mise en œuvre, ça prend beaucoup de temps. Ça a été dit tout à l'heure. On a chaque fois un changement de gouvernement et chaque fois les priorités changent. Et quand on commence, et surtout que la culture, on n'est pas un pays qui a une culture d'évaluation. On est un peu récent. Donc, on n'est pas très écouté, souvent. On n'est pas ignoré non plus. Mais on n'est pas... Les recommandations sont adoptées tout de suite. Et quand elles sont adoptées, s'il y a une équipe qui commence la mise en œuvre, il y a une autre équipe qui dégage d'autres priorités, on est parti en calan grec. Et c'est pour cela que j'ai dit la patience et la persévérance. Et il faut revenir sur les choses structurantes. La question de l'eau, elle était posée depuis les années 80. Mais il y avait un choix à faire au niveau du Maroc. Le Maroc, il a connu son explosion démographique dans les années 80. Et l'essentiel du budget de l'État, parce qu'on est un pays pauvre avec une vision du luxe, il faut le dire, c'était le premier choix, c'est l'éducation, l'emploi et lutter contre la délinquance, le chômage, etc., et surtout les émeutes. Il faut stabiliser le pays. La question de l'eau était reportée. Et il y a un choix de l'eau à faire. Et ça coûte énormément cher. C'est la salinité de l'eau. On n'a pas assez d'eau pour répondre aux besoins du pays. Et même si on mobilise l'essentiel, il reste toujours une partie d'eau qu'il faut chercher ailleurs. Et c'est un choix. C'est maintenant qu'on est revenu parce qu'on n'a plus le choix. Et c'est maintenant qu'on revient aux conclusions des années 80, des conclusions des années 90 et essayer de les mettre en œuvre seulement que la donnée a changé. L'énergie coûte très cher et tout est devenu urgent dans notre pays. Merci.
Thank you very much. And I guess the question for evaluation is whether it can play a role in helping sort through all of those urgent priorities and in what way and how to support an effective political process around that. Let me just give you, we're almost coming to the end and I'm conscious we're running out of time, but I just want to take a couple of more contributions from the floor. If anybody would like to come in and address one of these questions or make a further comment on what you've heard, particularly maybe around these tensions that we're trying to resolve here between, the impartiality, the objectivity of evaluation, the need to be proximate to political decision-making, the need to tackle these big ultimately, you know, big political questions. Sir, please come on in.
Thank you so much. I'm Joseph from Malawi. I just want to speak on two issues. Basically, the other issues about, I think what I'm getting here is the issue, how we address the issue of them and us. If we're talking politicians and we're talking ourselves as evaluators, where do we come together to think the same and to act the same? I think that's something that we need to be looking into. Maybe it brings back to the issue about institutionalizing the M&E in the systems. How do we ensure that we take evaluation as part of a management tool or maybe a decision-making tool, both at every level, whether at technical, at political, at national, at rural level? I think these are maybe the questions that we need to be looking into, and the issues of processes and maybe asking the real questions, communicating. But I think to me, the main issue is we tend to be separating ourselves from them. But I think the issue is now, how do we come together, discuss issues together, and I think come to a common conclusion, come to a common understanding on how we move forward in terms of the recommendations or the results of an evaluation, and making sure that everybody acts. I think that's maybe something that we need to be looking into more seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. That's an interesting observation. The gentleman at the front here.
My name is James Afif Chibe, and I come from Liberia. Fortunately, I was director for the MAE, and then I moved on as director for developing the National Development Plan, and personally, with the Liberia Revenue Authority. So you can see to what extent I've been involved in evaluation, developing a plan, and now looking for the funding to support the development plan and MAE. So I bring a lot in terms of the experience. But what I know, we need to ensure that there's a political will. Sometimes people don't see evaluation as a key in terms of transforming the lives of people. They think evaluation is like an auditor spying on someone. And I think it's about time that we see evaluation as a means of enhancing the work that we do. And so if we are to actually get the feedback from the evaluation and make the kind of decision that we should be making, I think most of the time we'll be moving in the direction that we should be moving. But the political will may not be there. And sometimes I can recall the new Minister of Finance came in and said he was going to ensure that he support the MAE system and create a condition wherein budget will be focused on monitoring and evaluation. To our utmost surprise, things change. And so once you can define what, especially for Liberia, they have been driving through the National Development Plan, and the plan is almost to an end in terms of the evaluation of the 5 years plan. The question that comes to mind, based on the evaluation in terms of its performance, to what extent are we reviewing and then taking the kind of decisions that are required? Sometimes we place money in the wrong direction, like the directors said this morning. Are we taking evaluation serious? Are we identifying the issues to see to what extent we'll put the resources where it's supposed to go? If we were to put money into evaluation, then we identify where the problems are and begin to solve the problem, because it is evaluation that is assessing what is happening, but we don't. Is there a political will? Political will for Liberia should be at both the executive, the legislators, and the judiciary. But sometimes you find them saying yes, but then to the end result, no. In Liberia, up to this date, we have not been able to have a clear defined policy. And once you have a clear defined policy and it's enacted into law, then it means that you have all of the different line, ministry and agency falling in line. Other than that, you can have the kind of evaluation that you need.
Thank you very much for that intervention. And we've come to the end of our time, but I would like to give you the chance to make a comment.
Thank you very much, Armina from Armenia. We have so much wisdom in the room, and so many points. We are discussing how to navigate in political context. this evaluation. My question comes from different angle, and not necessarily, if no time now, through bilateral discussions, we could remember my face, please. I will be interested to listen to your viewpoints. My question is from other angle. What to do, what can be entry points in a context when there is no evaluation, no monitoring, and everyone is sort of happy with each other, life without evaluators. And when there is still will to create some demand. So what could be your recommendations to entry points to create that demand and that dialogue? This is number one. Number two is, can be there evaluation without monitoring? I mean, are there this context? Is it still helpful? Can it still happen? And last question to a senior from Morocco. Sorry, my knowledge may be wrong, but I have heard that evaluation is recorded in constitution of the country. Is it helpful?
Okay.
Thank you.
There was a lot of questions there, and I'm
Not
hoping,
necessarily to answer now.
I'm hoping that our panelists will have the opportunity to say back and answer some of your points, because they're all really useful questions. We have come to the end of this session. My own belief is it's vital to finish when you want more, because you'll keep the conversation going and we'll keep coming back to these issues over the next few days. I think we've had all kinds of interesting perspectives here. For me, and I'm not going to go back to everyone now, but for me, I just keep coming back to this notion. The evaluation is not purely a technocratic or technical exercise. Our values matter. And I think where we are today, our values matter even more. But what we have to find a way is working within a framework in which those values are, come to life. And I think that's a hugely important challenge for us as evaluators in the world that we're now in. I can't thank panelists enough. Kevin, George, Isabella, El-Hassan, thank you so much for helping us to navigate this topic today. And as I say, the next couple of days, we'll keep coming back to issues. So thank you to all of you for sharing your comments and your questions. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, George, for hanging